Welcome to the show. I'm Michael Johnston. Joining me today is Isaac Presley. Isaac is the CEO of Cordant Wealth, a wealth management firm focused on working with tech professionals and other investors who are receiving equity compensation. He's been recognized 5 times by Investopedia as a top 100 advisor in the US, and his writing has been featured in Bloomberg, US News, and Yahoo Finance, among others. Isaac, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk about RSUs today.
Yeah, we're gonna geek out. This is great. I love getting into the weeds here as a finance guy, and this is a great topic to do it on. So let's start at a high level, though, before we get into the weeds. What's an RSU? And I guess to jump a little ahead a little bit, how's it different from stock options? Probably something more people are familiar with.
Yeah, so RSUs, restricted stock units. So I think the first two letters there are the important parts. Your company is going to grant you an RSU. It's basically shares of your company stock. The important thing, the difference between just shares in the open market is they're restricted. So they don't actually become yours until they vest, which is one of the key terms you need to understand with RSUs. Most of the time that's done over a period of time. So these shares are granted to you at the outset, and then they become yours to do whatever you want with in line with that vesting schedule. So it's a form of compensation, very popular these days at a lot of tech companies or publicly traded companies. A decade or maybe two ago, options used to be a more popular form of compensation. Really, the main difference between RSUs and stock options is basically what they're worth or how that value is calculated. So RSUs, once they vest, if your company is $50 a share, that $50 is basically the income to you and what they're worth on that date. Options, on the other hand, have what's called a strike price. And so say you're granted shares or options at $50 a share. If the company's worth more than $50, that difference is the amount that it's worth to you or the value of that option. If your company goes down from the period of time that they were granted, so say the company's worth $40 a share now, that option is what's called underwater. And technically that option is worthless to you at that point. Your strike price is at 50, the company's trading for 40. The value is less than the strike price, and that option isn't worth anything to you in that scenario. With an RSU, even if they were granted at 50, but the company goes down to 40, it's still worth $40 a share to you in terms of compensation.
Got it. So we're going to get in. We're talking about the what, I guess, and the how of this a little bit. But just to touch first on, I'd like to understand the why too, whether it's a tax incentive or tax credit. But in this case, just to understand the why of an RSU. I think the idea is similar to a stock option. You want to incentivize your high performing employees. You want to incentivize them to feel like they've got skin in the game, and if the value of the company goes up, they're going to benefit personally. And then also keep them around. Is that right? If they've got to stick around in order to get this. If they leave and jump ship and go work for a competitor, they're going to leave some money on the table. So make it hurt a little bit there. Did I about get that right, or did I?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, basically, there's three main forms of compensation out there. There's your salary, there's a bonus, and there's stock compensation. So RSUs are going to fall in that stock compensation bucket. It's going to align the employee's incentive with the company's incentive, ideally. Like if the company's stock goes up, your compensation is going to go up. And then with that vesting schedule, it causes people to stick around so that they can get all those shares vested and realize that compensation.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about taxes then. So at a high level, how are RSUs taxed?
Yeah, RSU, a lot of questions about this, but they're actually pretty straightforward. So I mentioned the two key dates earlier that you need to know with RSU. So the first one is the grant date. So this is the day that the company grants you shares. The vest date is really what you should care about as an employee. These are the day that those shares become yours. The way RSUs get taxed is those shares get taxed as income on the day they vest, or you could think about it in the calendar year in which they vest. So if you're granted, say, 4,000 RSUs that vest over 4 years, you're going to have 1,000 RSUs vest in the next 4 years. And then depending on the price of your company stock on the day that those shares vest, that's going to be taxed to you as ordinary income. So really, you should think about that as no different than your salary or your bonus. It's going to get taxed the same way based on the date that they vest. And that it doesn't matter if you sell the shares or hold the shares, you're still paying income tax on the day they vest.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So let's just use a real world example here. Let's say it's December 2023, you're granted, we use nice round numbers here, 4,000 restricted stock units. They're going to vest over 4 years. So December 2023, there's no tax event. Is that right? You've just been granted them, but nothing has vested yet.
Yep.
So then let's fast forward a year and it's December 2024. Now, 25% in this hypothetical example, it doesn't have to be this format. I'm just kind of making up a dummy example here. 25% vest, so that's 1,000 shares. Let's say the company's trading at $100 a share, so that's a pretty nice valuation there. I guess that's $100,000 in ordinary income. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And so most companies are going to either vest. Quarterly vesting has become popular, but from a tax perspective, it's all based on the amount that's going to vest in a year. So if you take that $4,000, divide it by 4-year vesting, you're going to have 1,000 shares vest each year. If the shares all vest at say $100, you're going to have $100,000 of additional income in that calendar year. And so, in terms of from a tax perspective, you're going to have your salary, you're going to have your bonus, and then you're going to have RSUs on top of that. Whatever marginal tax bracket you're in for that $100,000, that's where you're going to get taxed on it.
I don't want to just take us on a little detour here because you said a really important word there is marginal. Yeah. So I think a lot of folks understand this, some don't. So if just as an example, if we have a progressive tax system in the US, not referring to it in a political way, but kind of how it's fundamentally structured, meaning your first few $1,000s of income are taxed at lower rates and then the tax rate increases. So just as an example here, if you're a married couple and your household income is $200,000, your effective tax rate is going to be about 20%. You take the total taxes you pay divided by 200,000. Your marginal tax rate, which is what Isaac just mentioned, I like to think of this as if you have one more dollar of income, what's it going to be taxed at? So if you're making $200,000 a year for your household, your marginal tax rate is actually 32%, more or less. I'm kind of using a hypothetical here, but that's a big difference. And it's important. I just want to make sure everyone understands the importance of that word marginal. Think of this as what's the tax you're going to pay on, not on an overall blended basis, but on the next dollar of revenue that you generate.
Yeah. And that's actually really important with RSUs as well, because the kind of the standard withholding for RSU taxes is going to be at 22%. And if you're say at the 32% tax bracket, right, on this $100,000 of RSU income that we're talking about, if all of that falls into the 32% tax bracket at the federal level, you're basically underpaying taxes by 10%. So you're going to end up owing $10,000 when you go to file your taxes. And that catches a lot of people off guard. If you're not doing that proactive tax planning, if you don't know how the marginal tax bracket works or what you're withholding, a lot of times that catches people by surprise. Yeah.
State taxes too, I'd point out. That's an issue, not an issue for some folks if your state doesn't have an income tax. Isaac and I both happen to be in the great state of Oregon, where there's about a 9% income tax, I think. So that can make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, and we work with people. We work with people: Oregon, California, Seattle. A lot of the different big tech companies. And Seattle, Washington State doesn't have an income tax. Oregon 9%, California even higher. So you got to factor in the state tax as well.
Yeah. Okay. So the upside of an RSU in this example we walked through is, I think it's pretty obvious. It's in this example, it can be a pretty nice piece of your compensation. The downside is you're getting restricted units, right? So you're not getting cash, but yet you are going to owe cash in the form of taxes. So I want to talk about a few strategies that you've kind of outlined, and I know you help some of your clients with ways to mitigate that. But before we get to that, actually, let's kind of talk about how should investors, employees, how should they look at this vesting? How should they kind of think about it psychologically and deciding what to do with this?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And kind of if you've been following along and if we've been doing a good job of kind of explaining how these work, what you're probably going to notice is RSUs, that form of compensation is really no different than a cash bonus. Cash bonus, you're going to receive the cash and you're going to pay taxes on it when you receive the cash. RSUs, you're going to receive the shares that are worth a certain amount, and those are going to be taxed as income when they vest. Really, there's no difference from a tax treatment there. One, you're getting cash in the bank account, and the other, you're getting shares of your company stock. from a tax perspective, no different. And so what I always encourage people to think about is, imagine your employer comes up with you, they hand you an envelope full of cash. What are you going to do with that envelope full of cash? Are you going to take that cash, go out and buy more of your company shares, or are you going to do it, use that cash to take a vacation or use it for spending, or maybe just invest that back into a diversified account? And usually when I pose this question, most people haven't thought of it that way, but they'll chuckle. And I've never had anybody say, yeah, I'd take that envelope full of cash and go buy more shares in my employer. So I think that's how we always like to frame it. Of kind of start, taxes are certainly very important, but always start from that investment lens of what would I do with the cash sitting in my bank account. And there's been a lot of studies done, research done that you can look those up, but there's no tax advantage to holding the shares. And from an investment perspective, most of the time, any individual stock, Morningstar has done some studies, and it's roughly like 1 in 5 individual companies is going to outperform the broad market. And a high percentage of those are going to have a very large decline. So really, there's no tax advantage. There's no odds in your favor in terms of an investment side. And so most of the time, it's going to make sense to just sell those RSUs when they vest. You're going to pay taxes on them anyway, and then take that cash and do something else with it.
Yeah. Okay. So having said all that, let's say you go the other way. Let's say you say, I think my company is a really good bet. I'm going to keep this in. Let's just use Intel, since we're both in the state of Oregon, as I mentioned, and Intel's a Portland-based company. So let's say that you hold on to the shares and the restricted units, and the value of it goes up. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on kind of the taxes of that. So to keep using our example, they vested, these 1,000 shares vested when they were at $100. So you had $100,000 of ordinary income there. Let's jump forward 10 years, and they've gone from $100 to $500. So can you explain, Isaac, how like that next step up or that next increase in value is taxed?
Sure. Yeah. And so that would be a really good outcome. Obviously, your shares went from 100 to 500. That would be great. So the $100,000, if you choose to hold your shares, that becomes your cost basis. So no different than if you took $100,000 and bought the shares on the open market. You're going to pay taxes again on your RSUs. You're going to pay taxes on that $100,000 when they vest. Anything beyond that is going to be capital gains. So if your shares go from $100,000 to $500,000, you've got a $400,000 gain. It's going to be taxed just as if any other capital gain would be taxed. So there's some different tax brackets as well. 15% tax bracket, say, with capital gains, and you're going to pay that on those shares when you sell them.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. So let's jump now to strategies to I guess I'll say handle restricted stock unit taxes or strategies around this. Yeah. You've got kind of 4 examples that I'll link to this article in the show notes. Isaac wrote a great article on this topic, but he kind of walked through 4 ways, strategies to kind of use in conjunction with RSUs vesting and you having this chunk of income. So the first one, maximize tax deferred contributions. Talk through what that looks like.
Yeah. So the way we think about this as viewing your RSUs, if you start with the premise that RSU compensation is just another form of compensation, don't think about it separately. And so there, it kind of unlocks this other form of compensation that you can use to fund tax advantaged accounts. And so a lot of times people at some of these large tech companies are going to have a 401k. Maybe they have the mega backdoor 401k. They're going to have an HSA option available to them. Sometimes they even have a deferred compensation account where you can really sock away a lot of income that's shielded from taxes. And so the idea here is, out of your salary and out of your bonus, you might not be maximizing your contributions into those accounts. I mean, on the deferred comp, for those that are eligible, I mean, sometimes you can do 75% of your salary or 75% of your bonus into these accounts. It's really just a huge opportunity to add money into these accounts. And so the idea here is to view that RSU compensation as just another form of compensation that you could then use to fund these accounts. So it doesn't really matter what account, but say you're not fully funding your 401k or your HSA or your deferred comp. Now, if you unlock that RSU compensation and can use that to fund these accounts, you're going to reduce your tax bill today. So on one hand, when your RSUs vest, your taxable income is going to go up. On the other hand, if you can put money into these tax deferred accounts, you're going to reduce your tax bill on the other side. So take that $100,000 that we've been talking about in terms of vesting. If you can simply sell your RSUs when they vest and you're going to pay taxes, say at the 32% marginal tax bracket on that, your taxable income is going to go up by your tax bill is going to go up by $32,000. If you can then literally just take that $100,000 and put it into your 401k or put it into your deferred comp, you're then reducing your taxable income and reducing your tax bill by $32,000 in that scenario. So basically, you've shifted your money from $100,000 into RSUs to $100,000 in a diversified way into one of these accounts and offset, whatever increased taxes you're going to have when those RSUs vest.
I love it. Great planning there. I've done episodes on the mega backdoor Roth and the HSA. I'll make sure those are linked in the show notes if anybody wants to go deeper on those. I'm sure you can reach out to Isaac too. He's obviously well versed in it. I haven't done one on the deferred comp plan yet. I got to make a note to do that in a future episode. So okay, so strategy number one,
chat about that one too.
Maximizing the tax deferred contributions. Number two, bunching deductions. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so bunching deductions, another strategy to utilize or leverage this RSU income to get a tax break. So most of the time now with the new tax law, for a lot of people, they're missing out on itemized deductions. So now we have a pretty high standard deduction. State and local taxes are capped at $10,000 as well. So people don't fully get a tap into that. So oftentimes your standard deduction is going to be higher than any itemized deduction you're taking. For our clients that are charitably inclined, say they're giving like $5,000 each year. Well, the idea with charitable bunching with RSUs is you could take RSUs that are vesting, say $100,000 that are vesting, and take maybe $25,000 of that and pull it forward into the current calendar year. So you're giving $25,000 to charity in the current year. That's going to boost your itemized deductions kind of above that standard threshold so that you can actually itemize and take the deductions from the charitable giving. The other kind of thing that you can incorporate with this, a lot of clients maybe don't want to give $25,000 in this year. They want to kind of spread it out as they were in the past. And that's where a donor advised fund might come into play for certain clients, where you can put the donation in there, say it's $25,000, get the tax break now, but then still gift it out over the next 5 years like you were before.
Yeah, great point there. I think it's about 90% of people, I think, Isaac, right now are taking the standard deduction, so not itemizing, which effectively means, I think a lot of people are confused about this, that for a lot of people, there's effectively no tax benefit for donating to charity. There's obviously other benefits to supporting causes that are near and dear to your heart. But for a lot of folks, there's no tax benefit because the standard deduction for a married couple is close to $27,000. So if you're not getting above that, but the donor advised fund that Isaac just mentioned is a great way to do that. And just to be clear on that, and by the way, I did an episode on that too that I'll link to in the show notes if you want to dive deep. But it's a way to effectively keep that money to get the tax benefit this year. Then you can still trickle out the donations, as Isaac mentioned. You can give, say $5,000 to your church this year, or $5,000 next year to the United Way, or whatever the name of the charity may be, whatever you support. A way to kind of trickle it out. Nice way to get that tax advantage in the current year, and really not alter your giving plans at all. The check isn't going to the charity until the next year, whenever you decide to write it. So pretty neat little tool there.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add on the donor advised fund front is back to our earlier example about holding the shares, right? So you've got, say, $100,000 that go to $500,000. The other thing you can do from a tax perspective with donor advised funds is gift those highly appreciated shares into the donor advised fund. So one, you get to basically wipe out that capital gain and not take that capital gain yourself. And then two, if you move $500,000 of shares, you still get that $500,000 charitable deduction on your tax return. So you kind of get a double whammy if you're gifting highly appreciated shares into that donor advised fund.
Yeah, great point. Way to avoid having to convert it to cash and then donate it. You can just put those highly appreciated shares directly into the donor advised fund. Okay, so let's step up the complexity a bit here and talk about some option strategies.
Yeah.
Take it away. This is above my pay grade, so you got to explain this one, Isaac.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely be careful with options. Options basically come with leverage, and you want to be careful of how you're using them. But this might be a strategy for somebody that's like, the rest of those don't work for me. I still want to hold these shares, but I'm uncomfortable with the risk I'm taking by holding the shares outright. And so options are a form of insurance. I mean, think about them from that standpoint. I mean, people use them to speculate, and people get in trouble with speculation, but originally they're a form of insurance essentially. And so there's a couple different strategies that you can use in conjunction with any shares that you're holding to kind of reduce your risk on that position. So the first one is just going to be a covered call. You might be familiar with that, maybe you've heard of that, but it's essentially, if you hold shares, we'll use Intel again as an example. If you hold shares in Intel, say you hold 1,000 shares, you could sell an option contract that covered 1,000 shares at a price above, typically it would be above the shares that the company is trading at today. And basically what that does, by selling the shares, you are bringing in income today for you're capping your upside. So if Intel's trading at $50 today, you sell an option contract at $60 a share, maybe you brought in, say, $2 to do that. And so you're generating an additional yield on that investment, which is kind of de-risking it in the sense that you're bringing in additional income on that position. If Intel were to go above $60 a share, say they go up to $70 a share, you're basically missing out on that upside, is what you're giving up for that income. So that's one way that you can use to mitigate some of the risk, right? We're bringing in about 4% in our example in terms of a yield on that position, and you're giving up on the upside. The other strategy that some people will do is something called a caller. This one gets a little bit more complex, even from the covered call, where you're doing basically a covered call. So that same idea, stock's trading at $50. You're going to sell an option at 60. So that any price movement above 60, you don't benefit from. You're then using that premium to buy a put. So what a put does is it's basically just protection on the downside. So if, say, in this example, you buy a put at $40 a share, if Intel trades between 40 and 60, it doesn't really matter from your perspective of having this collar on. But if it goes below 40, your downside's capped. You basically don't lose any more than that $10 a share from $50 a share to 40. Same on the upside. If the company goes above 60, you're not benefiting in that. So you've limited the range of outcomes to between 60 and 40. And you can structure it in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes you can structure it where it literally just offsets the amount that you're bringing in for giving up the upside, offsets the protection that you're buying on the downside. Typically, the downside protection is a little bit more expensive, so you've got to kind of structure it the right way. But these are not exactly long-term solutions. But if, for example, somebody had some capital gains and it made a lot more sense for them to realize their capital gains next year than this year, putting in place a strategy like this to hedge your position until you're in a better position to sell the shares might make sense.
Sure. Okay. That's a great explanation. Thanks, Isaac. And again, there'll be a link in the show notes to the article where Isaac has some nice visuals and walks through this. Want to ask you about a couple other strategies. The Inflation Reduction Act, I think, introduced some pretty significant tax credits. For example, solar panels. Am I thinking about that the right way? That if you've got this inflow of cash and you use it for something that's going to generate a credit, you can kind of effectively offset part of that increase in taxes you're going to owe?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would think about that similar to the deduction bunching thing of kind of pick the years where you think your tax bracket's going to be the highest. So this gets out to like sort of multi-year cash planning. And so if you have some flexibility in terms of timing a credit or even deductions, obviously within reason, and you kind of, don't want to, do too much work and change your life too much just to save a buck on taxes or something like that. But if you have flexibility, if you know you're going to be in a high tax bracket this year and a low tax bracket next year, if you got some credits that you can accelerate into this year, like absolutely it would make more sense to do it this year than next year.
Yeah. There can be some ways to do that too with some private investments like energy, for example, and oil and gas. And this gets a little bit complicated, but there's ways where sometimes you make a private investment in an energy company that's drilling wells, for example, and you can get a big pass through loss in the first year. Sometimes that can be used to offset active income. A lot of times with real estate, it can only be used to offset passive income, so it won't do you much good. But there's a lot of wrinkles around that. So do your due diligence or talk to someone like Isaac before you do that. But it's a great point there he makes about kind of planning strategically in these years where you're going to be in this high marginal tax bracket. Try to bunch your deductions and your credits into that year. So Isaac, I always like to ask this: what do people screw up with RSUs? You kind of touched on some of this throughout,
Yep.
making sure you understand how much in taxes being withheld was something you mentioned earlier. Anything else people screw up or would screw up if they didn't have you to guide them through this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big three, and I don't know if screw up is the right word, but I would say the things that we see people missing is one, being surprised by their tax bill next year. I got these
Yep.
RSUs and I didn't know how much my tax bill was going to be. And a lot of times that comes from just under withholding. That'd be one. I think two is just kind of like hitting the default button. And this is not just with RSUs. We see this across people's financial situation. Is just like the default with RSUs is typically to hold the shares. And so
Yeah.
we see a lot of people holding them, not because that's intentional per se, or that they really feel strongly that their company's going to do well. It's just like, that's the default option, and I'm going to hold these shares. And so really thinking about it from the perspective of, what do I need to do to fund my goals, and does RSUs fit into that versus it's the default. And then I think the third one, kind of along these same lines, is just not viewing RSUs as that separate form of compensation that I can use to fund some of these tax deferred accounts or something like that. It oftentimes gets siloed. It's oftentimes a 401ks at Fidelity and your RSUs are at E-Trade. And so you view those as separate things, but just view those as another form of compensation that you can use to fully fund some of these generous benefits that you have through your employer, and take advantage of those.
Yeah, can't emphasize that enough. If you're not taking advantage of these programs, you're leaving money on the table. It's a great point you make about just the power of the default and the investor psychology. Whatever is the default, we tend to just stick with it, even when it's not in our best interest. That's a whole nother topic for another day, talking about investor psychology and human psychology in general. I mean, investors are human beings, so we succumb to some of these behavioral traps, I guess. Isaac, last question for you. Where can folks go if they want to reach out to you, find out more about you?
Yeah, so the best way is just our website. It's cordantwealth.com, CORDANT wealth.com. Michael kind of mentioned this already. We've got a bunch of resources out there, RSUs, ESPP, different information about different company plans and things like that. And so, yeah, we like to put all this out here as a way to educate people. And, if you're interested in working with us or having the conversation, there's a way on our website for you to schedule as well.
Yeah, they do a great job with the education. I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. But if you're someone whose equity is a big piece of your compensation, check it out and reach out to Isaac if you got questions. With that, Isaac, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, great to be here.